Good morning, brothers and sisters. The studies that we've looked at so far have been about women who have been through times of crisis and great difficulty. The thing that unites them all together is their great faith. Whatever the diverse circumstances, whatever their diverse personalities might have been, their faith is what held them together as individuals and helped them to make it through all of the great difficulties and challenges of their lives. Sometimes you look at these women's lives and you think to yourself, it couldn't have been any more difficult. Every possible obstacle, every possible problem that could arise arose in their lives. And somehow they made it through. They made it through because of their faith. In this session, we're going to look at two Gentile women. We're going to look at Rahab, and we're going to look at Ruth. We know the stories well, but they both came out of Gentile darkness. Rahab was a prostitute. Sometimes the commentators try to take the term that is used for her and ratchet it down to innkeeper, as if to say, well, she kept a hotel, and people stayed at the hotel. But the bulk of scholarship is in the direction that she was what the text actually said she was. We don't need to feel badly about that, because that's deliberate. God is showing us that whatever our background, whatever the life that we have lived, whatever the struggles we have had and continue to have, and for myself, 53 years of age and 30 years in the truth, I still struggle with things that I struggled with when I was 16 years old. The same kinds of sins. What is important for Rahab is not who she was, but who she became. Who she became. And so it says in verse 1, Joshua the son of Nun, and this is Joshua chapter 2, sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into an harlot's house named Rahab. They lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country. Now you notice he says all the country, which is not really what Joshua was interested in. Joshua was interested in the details of Jericho, but such was the extreme panic that was going on in the land at that time. And it was extreme panic. These people were in absolute terror, because this horde that could not be reasoned with, that had no mercy, that killed men, women, and children, was cutting like a scythe through the land. And their God was the most powerful of all gods in the minds of the Gentiles. And their God traveled with them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Can you imagine what that would look like to Gentile unbelievers when they sent their spies out to look at Israel and what they were doing in secret? But just imagine the terror of the Lord, the terror of the Jews, the terror of Joshua was extreme in the hearts of the inhabitants of the land. They knew what they had done to Sihon and to Og. They knew these things. And we know they knew these things because of the details that Rahab actually speaks out. Now, Rahab has been living a life of degradation. She might have been attractive enough to be someone who could do this particular trade, this terrible job that she did. But it is possible, too, that she came from a poor family. It's possible that what she made cared for herself, her father, her mother, her sisters, her brothers, and their families. And so she wasn't someone who just did what she did because it was what she wanted to do. It might have been force of circumstance the level of society she was in, and the poverty that she might have grown up in. She was the wage earner for an extended family doing this work that she did. And if there was anybody in the land who understood the reasons for which the land was vomiting out its inhabitants, if there was anybody who saw that day to day in her everyday life and knew it intimately, it was Rahab. And when you have nothing, you were at the bottom of society, you think differently. Sometimes you look at things in a way that is different to the rest of your society. Because you're in the edge. You're on the edge and you're on the outskirts of the social fabric. You view the people in a different way. You see people as they are, not as how they present themselves to each other. The men that would come in to where she was would come to her place. She would see the mask, and then she would see the real person under the mask. She would often hear things, secrets, things she ought not to have heard about what was going on, people's fears, what was going on in the government, what the king said, what the king was doing, things that the king was about to do. She had access to these kinds of things. But she had an intelligent mind, a mind capable of thinking very deeply and analyzing. There was one private place in her house, one private place on the house that was built into the wall of Jericho. And that was the roof. And on the roof she would have privacy, she would have peace. She'd be able to think. Up there she had straw, she had those things with which she might have woven things like the rope that she used to save the men whose lives that she saved. And up there she would have time to think about this wondrous God and these people. And because of the fact that she could see the shame, she could see the underbelly of the society, she knew it was a good thing that this God and the people that were motivated by Him were doing the things that they were doing. And I wonder if in some way she reached out to and prayed to the God of Israel, asking for His mercy, asking that if it were possible, He might save her family. It says the two men came in, and then the king sends this message, and what does she do? Verse 4, the woman took the two men and hid them. Now this is an act of high treason. It's an act of high treason that Rahab has just done. Not only might she die if she's found out, but the whole family that she loves and maybe supports might be executed too. As an example to the rest of the nation, do not have anything to do with the Israelites. But she's courageous. She's a woman of conscience. Now just think about that. Here is a woman who is a prostitute, who also has this capacity for faith and belief and this strong conscience towards God, who understands in her heart right and wrong, good and evil, things that should not be done, and the way things ought to be. And when she sees these two men, she knows they're foreigners. She has never seen them before. She knows that they are not from this place. And she also knows when men have something to hide, because she's seen hundreds of men who have something to hide. These two men are hiding something, and she realizes that's who these two people are. And instead of seeking the rewards and seeking what she could have gotten by betraying them, she takes them and she hides them. Why does she do that? Because she believes that their cause is just. Because she believes that the God of Israel is going to be victorious. Because she believes that Israel has been given the land.
She believed all those things. I mean, just imagine that. She had the depth of insight in her awful place that the thief on the cross beside Jesus had about who he was in that time of great anguish, in the crucifixion. There's this amazing capacity for spiritual thinking in this woman. When we look at ourselves as individuals, we don't have to go too far to think about that mixture, that living together of clean and unclean in our own minds, in our own hearts, in our own lives. We might look at Rahab and see her as some distant, colorful personality way removed from us, but she isn't really. She's someone like us in this age, struggling with the things that I struggle, struggling with the things that you struggle, with good and evil inside of us, hoping and praying that God will help us so that in the return and the judgment seat, we shall have eternal life, in spite of the way we are, what we're made of, because of our faith. Not because we were clean and righteous and good and honorable and noble. Those are things that we barely ever are. And when we are that way, the glory is God's, not ours. She takes the two men, she hid them, and she said thus, "They came men unto me, but I don't know where they went." Now, a lot has been made of Rahab's lie. How is it that she could tell a lie? Is it wrong or is it right? And maybe that's something we could deal with in the question period, if the question comes up. I've got some thoughts on that I can share with you from a brother who I think really expressed it brilliantly. And so it says, "It came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for ye shall overtake them." Now, one little fact to keep in mind is that the gate had been shut. That means there was no way out for these two spies. They were caught, they were trapped, they couldn't get out. There was no way they could get out of this place. These two men are caught in the worst of all circumstances. And the only thing that they have to work with is trust and a link and something in this woman that they can rely on in the hope that she will not betray them. She had brought them up to the roof of the house and hid them with the stalks of flax which she had laid in order upon the roof. And the men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords. And as soon as they were pursued after them, they which pursued after them were gone, they shut the gate. And before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof. And she said unto the men, and this speech, these words, from verses 9 to 13, this is one of the longest uninterrupted statements by a woman in the Bible. Just listen to this confession of faith. "I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when ye came out of Egypt." Now that had happened a whole generation before. But the Canaanites still remembered that. They were still shocked by that. It was still in their memory. "And what ye did unto the two kings of the Amorites that were on the other side Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed." And as soon as we heard those things, our hearts did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. You know, it's a funny thing. These people were in terror. These people, their hearts melted. And one can only assume that they knew. They knew the things that they were doing in that city. Those things that Leviticus says should never be done. They were doing those things. They knew that they were doing wrong. Romans chapter 1 talks about the fact that God has made it so that mankind has a conscience. And deep down inside, they know good and evil. It's not that they don't know, they do know. And so there's a kind of accountability that the world at large has to God, whether they understand the gospel or not, because He's put it in them. God gave them up to do the evil things they did, that they knew they should not do. And in this life, many of them have in history and still do now experience the consequences of those things which they do that they know shouldn't be done. And so these people, part of the terror is because they know they've done wrong. They know that their life is evil. They know that the oppression of the poor and all of the things that were done were things that were reprehensible. They knew that. That added to the terror. And Rahab says, we're terrified. We're terrified. And then she says the following words. For the Lord, your God, He is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. You know who had said that before? Moses. In Deuteronomy 4 verse 39, this is what Moses says. And just look at the words that Rahab has just said and listen to this. Know therefore this day, and consider it in thine heart, that the Lord, He is God in heaven above and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. So how is it that Rahab would say words just like the words spoken by the meekest man on the face of the earth? Because she had a heart like Moses' heart. All the work that Rahab did, all this work, and this awful job that she had, was for the care and feeding of others. The work of Moses was for the entire congregation. He had to care for everybody, with no thought for himself. And so what wells up out of Rahab is a faith of the quality of the faith in Moses, the servant of God. Can you imagine what it was like for those two spies to listen to a woman doing this kind of work in a Gentile city? To say that to them? You know, Matthew chapter 1 says that she married a man named Salmon, who might have been a prince of the congregation, who might have been one of the spies. It is easy to see how a man looking at that kind of faith in this woman would see her real character underneath all the mess and all the experience of her life and all the degradation, and fall in love with her. And after making this incredible confession of faith, incredible, she says, now therefore I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, because I won't believe any other promise. Swear unto me by Yahweh, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me some kind of true token that I can trust you, and that ye will save alive who? My father, my mother, my brethren, my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. You notice she never mentions my son or my daughter. Because doing the kind of work Rahab did, she just accepted, I'll never have a husband. I'll never have children. Who would want me doing what I do? More is the joy then when we read that little verse in Matthew chapter 1. That someone did love her. And someone did marry her. And the men answered her, Our life for yours, if ye utter not this our business. And it shall be, when the Lord hath given us the land, we will deal kindly and truly with thee. She let them down by a cord. And she had to tie a scarlet cord in the window. Scarlet. That color that has so many echoes back to the atonement. From the creature that was crushed to make the dye, to all of the echoes of the priesthood, of the red heifer, all those things tied together. And so she puts a symbol in the window that is going to get her saved. When the Israelites, like the angel that passed over Egypt, pass over the country of Jericho and find this family and group of friends in the house of the prostitute Rahab and save them all alive. It says in chapter 6, verse 25, And Joshua saved Rahab the harlot alive, and her father's household, and all that she had. And she dwells in Israel, even unto this day, because she hid the messengers which Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Verse 23 says, they saved her, they found her, they brought them all out, and they kept them outside of the camp. But they didn't stay outside of the camp of Israel. They would come into the camp and dwell in the midst of Israel. And then Matthew chapter 1 verse 5 says, And Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. Now don't imagine that her life was easy at all. If she was beautiful, and having been a prostitute, can you imagine what some of the sisters in Israel would say about her? How some of them would treat her. How some of them, seeing her little boy, Boaz, coming to play with their children, would guide their children away from him. Don't play with that child. How the sisters would look at Salmon differently, and the brothers also, some of them. I would ask themselves, well, what does he think he's doing? And that might all be true, because when we look at Boaz in the book of Ruth, he's a mature, older man, and he's single. There's no wife in his life. And Boaz probably had reconciled himself to the fact, I'm half Canaanite, half Jew, and I'm never going to get a better half. And I'm just going to live with that and carry on with my life. Rahab's life in Israel would not have been Disneyland. It would have been really, really difficult. But she went anyway. She went anyway. I know what I am and what those women are saying about me. I did those things. I don't deny it. But I'm still staying here because this is where I want to be. She looked at the difficult ecclesia of Israel, the difficult life she would live in it, and she still chose to be there because she was sheltering under the wings of the God of Israel. Under the wings of the God of Israel. And when we go to Ruth chapter 1, brothers and sisters, we read about another Gentile woman who, taught by a Jewish mother-in-law, accepts the truth. And when her husband dies and she's childless, and all of Moab is around, and she can go right back into the society if she wants to, she can go right back and reintegrate herself into Moab. Instead of doing that, and choosing ease, choosing entitlement, instead of doing that, she chooses obligation and faith. And look at what she says. Verse 16. Naomi looks at her. And Orpah has already left. Orpah's name means the back of the neck, and that's probably what they saw as she left Naomi behind. And Ruth says, entreat me not to leave thee, and to return from following thee, for whither thou goest, I will go. Where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people, for good or for bad, for better or for worse, shall be my people, and thy God, my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. And so, like the woman who would be her mother-in-law, whether she were alive or dead, she chose to be in the ecclesia of Israel with all its fighting and all its quarreling, with all its conflict, with all its struggles, with all its doubts, with all its hopes and dreams, with its belief, with its faith, with its future. She chose that. And all the discomforts that came with it. This is a sensitive, gentle, warm-hearted, considerate, caring, deeply insightful, and deeply introspective woman. That's what Ruth is like. And Ruth knew what the Jewish men thought about Moab, because her mother-in-law might have warned her. You can't, I don't advise you to come back to this life. Don't come back with me. I can't offer you anything. Can't offer you protection. I can't take care of you. I'd be a burden for you. And you know what the Jewish men thought about the Moabitish women because of what had been done in the days of Balaam, which caused Israel to sin and to fall. And she knew that. She would have known that. She must have known that. And she still chose to go. I'm coming back to the land. I'm coming back to the land because I believe in your God. And I'm not staying here. I'm not going back to my mom and dad's. I'm not going back there. Because as much as I love them, I will not be swallowed back up into that society. And into those beliefs. And into all of that ignorance. I know and I see clearly the truth. I want it. And I want to be with you. You are my family. And I'm going to care for you. Naomi comes back with a Gentile daughter-in-law and nothing in her hand. And Naomi comes back into Bethlehem, Judah, that she had left behind with her hasty, strong-minded, bull-headed husband. Verse 21, she says, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. But was she really empty? She was fuller than she'd ever been in her life, because Ruth was at her side. But she was empty as far as material things were concerned. She'd lost her youth. Any attractiveness she had was gone. She'd lost her children. She'd lost her husband. All the wealth that a woman could have in this society, she'd lost. Except for Ruth, the Moabitess. And then, verse 22, Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. In the beginning of barley harvest. It says, brothers and sisters, in chapter 2, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And who is Boaz? Boaz is Rahab's son, who had seen the tears and the humiliation, but also the joy and the belief and the faith of his mother. He had seen a woman who was not born into the faith. She chose it from the outside in. She came in, like me and so many of you in this room, from the outside. That's who this is. And there's nobody that's going and bringing food to Naomi. The villagers come out to see her. Is this Naomi? They know she's back with her daughter-in-law, but things are still hard. There'd been famine in the land. And things are not easy. And it doesn't seem as if there were people coming forward and showing generosity. And so Ruth doesn't say to herself, I'm entitled to safety. I'm entitled, since I've made this big step to come into the land, to just stay put and take it easy. Somebody's going to help us at some point in time. God will help us, I know. A brother told me once, if you sit on a rock and say, God help me, God will help you to sit on that rock. So Ruth doesn't sit on a rock. She looks at her mother-in-law and she says, this is an old sister. She can't go and get food and do what the poor do and go in the field and glean. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And I know what could happen to me. And I know what they think of Moabitess girls. But I'm going anyway. Because I believe God will look after me. and it says, Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, I'm going and you can't say anything about it. Is that what she says? There isn't that kind of spectacular rudeness. Even though she was a married woman and fully grown. Look at what she says to helpless old Naomi. Let me go. So she asks Naomi's permission. Can you imagine that? Look at the honor that she shows a woman who thinks she has nothing. Look at the honor that she shows this aged sister. And she says, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. Maybe someone will feel sorry for me and for us and let us into his field. And Naomi, in spite of everything in her that wants to say no, says, go, my daughter. Why would she say that? Because she's hungry. She's hungry. She's hungry. Ruth is hungry. Whatever little food they brought out of Moab is gone. There's no one showing up at the door giving them food. She's hungry. And she can't think of another way. So she lets her go reluctantly, praying all the way, I'm sure, for her daughter, Ruth, the Gentile. She went and she came, and it says, her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz. As if it just happened by chance, but of course nothing happens by chance. In these kinds of matters in the life of a believer, in these sorts of things, she was directed into that field. And she goes into the field, and she's there all day long, and then Boaz arrives. And it says, verse 5, Boaz said unto his servant that was set over the reapers, whose damsel is this? Whose servant girl is this? Whose girl is this? Whose daughter is this? Whose young lady is this? Because he sees her. He doesn't know who she is. And there she is, reaping and gleaning in the field. Or gleaning in the field. And by the way, if you think gleaning in the field meant that you would be going behind these guys and there would be arms full of grain, that's not the way it was. They didn't let that much fall. Little bits fell. So it was an all-day activity to get enough grain for a meal. That's what it was. We might have thought, well, a couple of hours and you've got enough to go home and you're good for a week. That's not the way it was. So it was back-breaking labor. And also, in a time when there wasn't a lot of plenty, there'd be a little bit of attitude that you would get from the people around. There'd be some attitude. Even though the law said that's the way that it has to be, they are to reap, there'd be a little bit of resentfulness that these people are coming and being freeloaders. Freeloaders, right? Freeloaders. In some sections of American society, there is the belief that the poor in this country are poor because it is their fault. There are some believe that they are poor because they want to be poor, or they're indolent, they're lazy. And if they put more effort into their lives, they, like any other American, could have a good life. And sometimes that you are a freeloader mentality can show itself in American society. It's uncharitable. It's un-American in many, many ways. Because by nature, though we are Christadelphians, we are raised in our society, Americans are warm-hearted, generous, giving, caring people. They're the most generous of all countries on the face of the earth, still, even now, in what they give to other countries in the world. The American brothers and sisters have given millions of dollars over the years to help brothers and sisters all around the world that they've never met. We saw pictures of a wonderful community work that's going on in Sierra Leone last night. And there is so much that's given. Sometimes if we have that attitude in our ecclesia where we look at someone whose life is always a circus and always in trouble and it's always a mess and they can never seem to pull themselves together and they're always in a financial struggle and mayhem of some type. If we might feel tempted to have that you are a freeloader mentality, let's think twice. Until you've walked in one's shoes and understood their upbringing and what they've been exposed to in their lives, and the struggles that they have. And unless you're willing to look at your own struggles, the kind of struggles I have, the kind of struggles you have, that bring us down low, because they're struggles that are common to so many of us today. Struggles of morality, struggles of faith, struggles of belief, struggles of confidence in the future and confidence in our God. All these sorts of struggles. Unless we're willing to face those things honestly, then what we do is we create the most desperate of situations for these brothers and sisters by that edgy, judgmental, hard-hearted attitude we have. And you might say, well, yes, but we're always helping them, and they never seem to be helped. They're always on the bottom there, needing the assistance of the ecclesia, and they never seem to do anything for themselves. Well, we do have to address that, but we also still have to have compassion. As God has compassion with us and forgives us all the many things we do every day to offend Him. Because He loves us and knows what we're made of. This wonderful, wonderful girl would be told by Boaz in verse 12, may Yahweh reward your work. May a full reward be given you of Yahweh Elohim of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Later on one night she would take the wing of his garment that was covering him and bring it over herself, because under his wing she would seek refuge. He'd be shocked awake, suddenly realize there's a woman beside him, and would treat her with the utmost respect, honoring her, demonstrating such gentlemanly behavior. The way that gentlemen in the South used to be with ladies. Incredible gentleness and respectfulness. And he says, you haven't gone after the young men, any of whom would have had you because they know now what kind of girl you are and would have married you? But you've come after an old man like me. And he would have felt himself old because compared to the young men, he was old. We don't know how old he was. 40s, maybe, 50s. By the age of the time. There she is at his feet. And the story ends, the story of Ruth, with this woman who never, ever, like Rahab, she never imagined, coming from where she came from, that she would have a husband in Israel. Have a husband. Who never imagined that she would have children of her own. Ever. But did her duty based on her faith and her belief. Fulfilled what she saw to be her obligation. Took care of her tiny little family within the ecclesia that she wasn't even related to by blood. An old mother-in-law. The story of Ruth is one of the most beautiful stories ever written. And it is one of the most beautiful stories in the Bible. And it says at the end of chapter 4, verse 15, and this is a hard thing to accomplish, and she never set out to accomplish this. And I can tell you from what I've seen over the years, nobody is harder on sisters than other sisters. And look at what the sisters say. In verse 13. Verse 14. And the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord which has not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. Pay attention to what these women have just said. This Gentile girl, from the foulest of Gentile countries, is better to you than 7 Jewish sons. That is altogether incredible. But it is a testament to the character of this gentle, loving, quiet, sensitive, insightful, courageous, wonderful sister. And one day there would be a sister just like her that God would give His child to.